Sephir Yaseer, the Book of Jasher, chapter 18, verse 1 through the end 43. And Abraham rose and did all that God had ordered him, and he took the men of his household and those bought with his money, and he circumcised them as the Lord had commanded him. And there was not one left whom he did not circumcise. And Abraham and his son Ishmael were circumcised in the flesh of their foreskin. 13 years old was Ishmael when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And in the third day Abraham went out of his tent and sat at the door to enjoy the heat of the sun during the pain of his flesh. And the Lord appeared to him in the plain of Mamre, and, and sent 3 of his ministering angels to visit him. And he was sitting at the door of the tent, and he lifted his eyes and saw, and lo, 3 men were coming from a distance. And he rose up and ran to meet them, and he bowed down to them and brought them into his house. And he said to them, If now I have found favor in your sight, turn in and eat a morsel of bread. And he pressed them, and they turned in, and he gave them water, and they washed their feet. And he placed them under a tree at the door of the tent. And Abraham ran and took a calf, tender and good, and he hastened to kill it, and gave it to his servant Eliezer to dress. And Abraham came to Sarah into the tent, and he said to her, Make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, kneaded, and make cakes to cover the pot containing the meat. And she did so. And Abraham hastened and brought before them butter and milk, beef and mutton, and gave it before them to eat, before the flesh of the calf was sufficiently done, and they did eat. And when they had done eating, one of them said to him, I will return to thee according to the time of life, and Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And the men afterward departed and went their ways to the places to which they were sent. In those days all the people of Sodom and Gomorrah and of the whole 5 cities were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord, and they provoked the Lord with their abominations. And they strengthened an aging abominably and scornfully before the Lord, and their wickedness and crimes were in those days great before the Lord. And they had in their land a very extensive valley, about half a day's walk, and in it there were fountains of water, and a great deal of herbage surrounding the water. And all the people of Sodom and Gomorrah went there 4 times in the year, with their wives and children, and all belonging to them, and they rejoiced there with timbrels and dances. And in the time of rejoicing, they would all rise and lay hold of their neighbors' wives, and some the virgin daughters of their neighbors, and they enjoyed them. And each man saw his wife and daughter in the hands of his neighbor and did not say a word. And they did so from morning to night. And they afterward returned home, each man to his house, and each woman to her tent. So they always did 4 times in the year. Also, when a stranger came into their cities and brought goods which he had purchased with a view to dispose of there, the people of these cities would assemble, men, women, and children, young and old, and go to the man and take his goods by force, giving a little to each man until there was an end to all the goods of the owner which he had brought into the land. And if the owner of the goods quarreled with them, saying, "What is this work which you have done to me?" then they would approach to him one by one, and each would show him the little which he took and taunt him, saying, "I only took what that little which thou didst give me." And when he heard this from them all, he would arise and go from them in sorrow and bitterness of soul. When they would all arise and go after him, and drive him out of the city with great noise and tumult. And there was a man from the country of Elam, who was leisurely going on the road, seated upon his ass, which carried a fine mantle of divers colors, and the mantle was bound with a cord upon the ass. And the man was on his journey, passing through the street of Sodom, when the sun set in the evening, and he remained there in order to abide during the night. But no one would let him into his house. And at that time there was in Sodom a wicked and mischievous man, one skillful to do evil, and his name was Hadad, or uh, Hadad. And he lifted his eyes and saw the traveler in the street of the city, and he came to him and said, "Whence comest thou, and whither dost thou go?" And the man said to him, "I am traveling from Hebron to Elam, where I belong. And as I passed, the sun set, and no one would suffer me to enter his house. Though I had bread and water, and also straw and provender for my ass, and am short of nothing." I'll stop here for a brief explanation. Um, Sodom is or was in a valley, which you can still see at the head of the Great Salt Sea called the Dead Sea. There's a deep valley there, and there's at the moment, and since this time, nothing there. And when I lived in Amman, Jordan, it is known that there is a fault from which earthquakes begin at Sodom in that area and quake up. You can feel them in Jordan. And this man's name, Hadad, Hedad, or Hedad, Hed or Hud, means that place where you stop, and Ad is a place, a name, and this is about where in Jordan you would find the place of Petra. And this is, I believe, south of the Dead Sea. And so you would find it there. This is where the great monuments of stone are built into the walls. And in the tradition of that region, the Islamic tradition, the Quran, it is also known that the people of Ad were he's not the fairest in terms of their dealings with taxing people for their goods. So it is possible when they say that they stole things from the man, it is in their mind a tax. And the tax was so much for passing through the area where you could sell a lot of stuff, but the people took a tax for it, that it became considered an extreme tax. So Hadad would be the very end point or stopping point of Ad. Hebron is a city north of Jerusalem, the city of David. And Al-Am, I believe, is where Mecca is. And if it's not Mecca, it is Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. So he was traveling, and this is about, we'll say, just beyond the midway point that he was stopping and met this man at the very end as he was leaving out. So he would be, for people coming from the north, the last person you would meet. And in fact, he's about to collect a tax himself. Verse 20. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the traveler in the street of the city. And he came to him and said, Whence comest thou, and whither dost thou go? And the man said to him, I am traveling from Hebron to Elam, where I belong. And as I passed, the sun set, and no one would suffer me to enter his house, though I had bread and water, and also straw and provender for my ass, and am short of nothing. So again, this is an expectation here. Generally, the law of the Middle East for people who are mobile, who live in tents that move, is that if a traveler comes by, you heard the etiquette that the great Abraham, who I consider very likely to be Hammurabi or a descendant of his, gave to his visitors. Um, the tent dwelling, the Bedouin, the red people of the region, will offer you some food, water, and 1 to 3 nights of shelter before moving on, expecting the same thing. Uh, Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities here were likely Greek people, maybe even Spartans. They were settled, and they may have been settled in that region for a very long time, and they did not offer free housing as was common in the region. Verse 22, and Hadad answered and said to him, All that thou shalt want shall be supplied by me, but in the street thou shalt not abide all night. So imagine the doorman of a hotel or a hotelier, a hospitaller, who knows the laws of the land. You can't sleep in the streets. You didn't bring a tent, but without necessarily saying how much it would cost, the man said that all that thou shalt want shall be supplied by me. I have everything you could ever imagine needing here. It is often that people need to stop here, and it's expensive before heading on their way to outside of the kingdom of Ad, the people of Ad, whose prophet was Saleh, the, if I'm not mistaken, the son of Hud, who's from Yemen. So this is a kingdom that spreads at least, or at least a people that is believed to spread from what is now modern day uh, Ukraine and the Black Sea, all the way down to Yemen and the Gulf of Aden. One great Semitic people with some diversity there as well. And Hadad brought him to his house, and he took off the mantle from the ass with the cord, and brought them to his house. And he gave the ass straw and provender, whilst the traveler ate and drank in Hadad's house. And he abode there that night. And in the morning the traveler rose up early to continue his journey. When Hadad said to him, Wait, comfort thy heart with a morsel of bread, and then go. And the man did so. And he remained with him, and they both ate and drank together during the day, when the man rose up to go. And Hadad said to him, Behold, now the day is declining. Thou hadst better remain all night, that thy heart may be comforted. And he pressed him so that he tarried there all night. And on the second day he rose up early to go away, when Hadad pressed him, saying, Comfort thy heart with a morsel of bread, and then go. And he remained and ate with him also the second day. And then the man rose up to continue his journey. And Hadad said to him, Behold, now the day is declining. Remain with me to comfort thy heart, and in the morning rise up early and go thy way. And the man would not remain, but rose and saddled his ass. And whilst he was saddling his ass, the wife of Hadad said to her husband, Behold, this man has remained with us for 2 days, eating and drinking, and he has given us nothing. And now shall he go away from us without giving anything? And Hadad said to her, Be silent. And the man saddled his ass to go, and he asked Hadad to give him the cord and mantle to tie it upon the ass. And Hadad said to him, What sayest thou? And he said to him, That thou, my lord, shalt give me the cord and the mantle, made with divers colors, which thou didst conceal with thee in thy house to take care of it. And Hadad answered the man, saying, This is the interpretation of thy dream. The cord which thou didst see means that thy life will be lengthened out like a cord. And having seen the mantle colored with all sorts of colors means that thou shalt have a vineyard in which thou wilt plant trees of all fruits. And the traveler answered, saying, Not so, my lord, for I was awake when I gave thee the cord, and also a mantle woven with different colors, which thou didst take off the ass, to put them by for me. And Hadad answered and said, Surely I have told thee the interpretation of thy dream, and it is a good dream, and this is the interpretation thereof. Now the sons of men give me 4 pieces of silver, which is my charge for interpreting dreams. And of thee only I require 3 pieces of silver. And the man was provoked at the words of Hadad, and he cried bitterly, and he brought Hadad to Serach, judge of Sodom. And the man laid his case before Serach, Seir. This man, Seir, is a cipher interpreter, and he is as if he has a like Socrates. Socrates could have been called Sirach. He was said to have a divine spirit, a daemon. An Ak and a daemon, Daemon, are about the same thing. Ak is an Egyptian word. So he had a cipher determining daemon. So a judge, in many ways, interprets the cipher, the confusing message in all the words that's presented before him or her. And Sirach was there to use his daemon to interpret a cipher that was happening here. What is happening between these 2 people? So before Sarak, the judge. And the man laid his cause before Sarak, the judge, when Hadad replied, saying, It is not so, but thus the matter stands. And the judge said to the traveler, This man Hadad telleth the truth, for he is famed in the cities for the accurate interpretation of dreams. And the man cried at the word of the judge, and he said, Not so, my lord, for it was in the day that I gave him the cord and mantle which was upon the ass, in order to put them by in his house. And they both disputed before the judge, the one saying, Thus the matter was, and the other declaring otherwise. And Hadad said to the man, Give me 4 pieces of silver, that I charge for my interpretations of dreams. I will not make any allowance, and give me the expense of the flour mills that thou didst eat in my house. And the man said to Hadad, Truly I will pay thee for what I ate in thy house, only give me the cord and mantle which thou didst conceal in thy house. And Hadad replied before the judge and said to the man, Did I not tell thee the interpretation of thy dream? The cord means that thy days shall be prolonged like a cord, and the mantle that thou wilt have a vineyard in which thou wilt plant all kinds of trees. This is the proper interpretation of thy dream. Now give me the 4 pieces of silver that I require as a compensation, for I will make thee no allowance. And before we go on, I'll express my bias. I am of the culture of the dream interpreter, at least in a very ancient way. And I may or may not be of the culture of the man in front of him, as well, who's leaving from Hebron. And though this is before the tribes of Israel gathered as they are today, even before Israel. So, to interpret this, though, I'm not sure how you're going to pay me my 4 pieces of silver. um, there are items that you may find in cultural bazaars. For instance, here in the United States, I also have, though they're not quite different, if you'll excuse that, boats have been used upon the oceans and canoes for a very long time, and the peoples of the United States, the original people, have been here for 36,000 years. This story is not even 6,000 years ago, and the people who are mentioned have been there since I believe 8000 BCE. There are items found in this area for people living there. They're called the corded ware people. If you notice the royal family of, well, Europe, the United States, Europe, and the United Kingdom specifically, and others in Sweden, you'll see them wearing cords, braided brands of cloth put together in different patterns. And the cords have meaning to them when they're worn. Now, if you go into a store and you buy one, it is expected that you buy it. Let's say he buys it right when he enters uh, the area that it was Sodom and Gomorrah, somewhere near. There's a place called Muta in Jordan. So near there, you enter that area and you purchase for a very reasonable price this beautiful, uh, what you believe you can use for your donkey, a saddle. With a cord hanging from it, and you just wrap it around that way. You don't know what it is, but you buy it, and then you find yourself at the very end of Hadad, the very end of Ad, and you meet this man, and he, after giving you really what probably would have been free provisions and some time, he gives you the interpretation of this chord. Because what he does is he collects them at that point. He tells you which one you chose, your fortune, and then you go on your way with the hope that that fortune will come true. So you selected a dream in the shape of this, not your dream, the dream someone else had, and you chose from the various corded ware, and then he interprets it, and as a sacrifice to the town or as a final tax. Some places will charge you, if you are an international traveler, an exit tax upon leaving the country, often as a surprise. I owe you what? To get out the country? How dare you? This is something that's done, and often, if you are traveling, you should check if you'll have to pay it, because some people don't have much money at the end of their travels. So he interprets it and he collects it. These may be items that are only kept within the community and not allowed out. So you may have, let's say, a feathered headdress or something else like that. Recently, His Holiness Pope Francis I, who also is the Archduke of Piedmont, Italy, Jorge Bergoglio, he and the Vatican were gifted certain things by the First Nation uh, people, tribes, if you will, of Canada, which they expected back, being of the same culture, maybe in exchange for some interpretation of what they meant for when they were given. But without knowing this in advance, you set up an expectation that may not be able to be met because often when gifts are given, they're expected to be kept. But in this ancient culture, which also makes it to Canada and to parts of the Southwest US and other places, a gift is given, and then when it's returned, you're considered trustworthy, and so, and then an interpretation is given for why that gift was lent to you, and you receive it back. And so, this whole Jasher 18 is here to discuss different cultures that exist and the preference for the one where when a gift is given, it is kept. And if you're interpreting dreams, you instead of asking for the money for the food and shelter, which he understood the man's culture didn't allow, well, their culture may not have allowed him to house someone for free or their laws. So here's an interpretation of your dreams. You can't keep basically you can't keep that item. It's something that we keep ourselves. You have to pay for the food and shelter, but I know you don't want to really hear it that way. So let me tell you the interpretation of this particular chord uh, as a tourist would, and then you can get on your way. And either I know you have vineyards and this wonderful life, or I truly pray that you will. And maybe there's some type of way we can affect it for you and where you're going. So they're just different cultures, and the preference, as stated by the Book of Jasher, is for the one where the gift is given, the housing is given for free, and the man is sent on his way. But that is not what the court prefers here, and that's not what they do. And as a result of it, they end up in a lot of trouble. Also, the wife swapping or exchanging is a culture that still exists today. It is often done and was done, and this is why I believe this is a Spartan community, to diversify uh, the households so that truly the entire community raises children. It's not that you raise your own children. You may not know that the young man or woman in your household is your son or daughter. They may be the son or daughter of someone else. And instead of keeping track of that, they would do these exchanges. Now, Hammurabi or Abraham would have known later, he hears the story you hear, that you would have too close relations between mothers and sons and uh, daughters and fathers and aunts and nephews and so forth. And that could create what he would have seen as unpreferred mental strains or mental illnesses or even physical deformities. And maybe in this culture, they weren't such a big deal or they weren't familiar with genetics. So, what you have here is, I believe, a culture which had developed over a long time and practiced a particular way of acting that when the great lawgiver Hammurabi, as we know him, Abraham, or at least within that tradition, when he set down the law, hearing these stories, he made changes that he felt would be better for civilization going ahead. He had the promise that his sons and daughters would equal the numbers of the stars, or at least reach the stars, which uh, we at least reached our sun with the probe. Um, So, and our eyes have reached some stars closer. With their light has been drawn back to the Earth from our with our telescopes. So he wanted to set up a culture that was different than this and overlap with it. So that's just another interpretation of it from a person who is of these cultures himself. And so a judge would be judging based on what he understood would be the laws of that land and their, at that point, very ancient culture. And the men cried at the words of Hadad, and they both quarreled before the judge. And the judge gave orders to his servants, who drove them harshly from the house. And they went away quarreling from the judge. When the people of Sodom heard them, and they gathered about them, they exclaimed against the stranger, and they drove him rashly from the city. And the man continued his journey upon his ass with bitterness of soul, lamenting and weeping. And whilst he was going along, he wept at what had happened to him in the corrupt city of Sodom. Yet at that point, he didn't pay for his lodging. He had additional food for his ass. He didn't carry out a piece of ware that, if it were seen outside, made him get him in trouble, and a number of other things. However, he didn't have a great experience. So the word evil should be satanic, and satanic literally means adversarial. Someone who will argue with you. This is my culture. Well, I'm sorry if that's your culture. That's not our law. And in that exchange, especially if you're not used to that culture, you may experience negativity and have to find your way out of it. And what is corrupt? Corrupt means that they don't follow, that they have a diminished civilization compared to your own, but not one that is completely different.